the New York Knicks have announced who their new head coach is going to be, and it's no other than Tom Thibodeau. And I told you guys November 2019, I wrote a story on why I thought Tom Thibodeau would be the perfect match for the New York Knicks before they brought in Rose, before they brought in new executives and new people to run the organization. I just thought that Thibs wanted to be here in New York. He's from New York. And his dream job, even when he was in Chicago, and everybody was asking him, and they were interviewing, what is your dream job in the NBA? He said that he wanted to be the New York Knicks head coach. And for years, the Knicks interviewed him, and they just didn't go with him. They interviewed him before Jeff Hornacek. They decided to go with Jeff Hornacek. What a big bust that was. When they brought in Derrick Fisher, before they brought in Derrick Fisher, they interviewed Tom Thibodeau. Did that work? No, it did not. So now this third time is the charm, and they had the opportunity. They brought in the right guy in Rose, and Rose really had no other guy besides Tom Thibodeau. Now, he interviewed Kenny Atkinson. Now, a lot of people wanted Kenny Atkinson because he developed a lot of young players on the Nets. He was there for 2 years. You saw the growth of some of the young players. And Mikey C and me are arguing this off air, and I'll tell you this. Mikey can say whatever he wants about Tom Thibodeau. Go look at his record. His record speaks for himself. Was he successful with the Timberwolves? He wasn't, okay? Nobody who is put in, besides Bill Belichick, has been successful as a GM and a coach, okay? It just doesn't work that way. Right. It's very, very hard to run an organization and coach a team.
Yeah, and you only see that really in football, and they've tried it in basketball, but like you said, it's not something that is very rare. It's something that's very rare. You need a case like that to happen, and Belichick has still, to this day, has been the only one who's been able to do that. We've seen teams function with good GMs and great coaches, or combination of both, or one or the other kind of thing, but yeah, he's really the only one. And especially doing it in basketball, where it's a lot more player-driven. The GMs matter for sure, but it's not as big of a deal as it is in some other sports where they have more of the control. So that kind of thing, yeah, you could tell that something like that was either going to be a complete boom where Thibodeau did everything right, or be a complete bust where, like you were saying, the young players really didn't tend to him in Minnesota. But you're right, they did tend to him in Chicago, and they were able to develop those players well as when he was just a coach. And now that's what he is with the Knicks. Now, granted, the Knicks are a younger team, I think, than what the Bulls were when they hired him, but it's still a good hire for that reason. Those are young players. And now, again, a lot of people were saying Atkinson because of the young players, and I wanted him too. But Thibodeau, it's not like Thibodeau is the other extreme where he's only good with veterans. He's good with young players too.
First of all, and Mikey says, Tom Thibodeau is not good with young players. What about Derrick Rose? Derrick Rose, when Tom Thibodeau took over the team, Derrick Rose was a rookie. Was Derrick Rose a bad player before he hurt his knee? No, he wasn't.
And he was MVP his second year.
And he was a good player. I understand his development and his skill. Again, Tom Thibodeau helped him grow as a player. You ask Derrick Rose, he became a better player with Tom Thibodeau. Then you ask Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler, when he came into the league, first of all, he was a late first-round draft pick. His skill was practically a great defender. He came from a team. Where did he play for? I forget where he played for.
I'm trying to remember. I think it was a mid-major school.
No, it was a small school. I think it was. I think it was.
He did play for Marquette. Okay,
Marquette.
Okay,
it was a small school. Marquette and Jimmy Butler was not a great offensive player. His skill was developed with Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau made him shoot 500 shots a day, made him work on his foul shooting. He became a great player, a great all-around player under Tom Thibodeau. He became the superstar player under Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau traded for Jimmy Butler from Chicago to the Timberwolves. It didn't work, and it really affected the teams. It hurt Karl Anthony Towns' growth. It hurt Andrew Wiggins. Andrew Wiggins is gone. He was traded to the Golden State Warriors. And Karl Anthony Towns is still there, and Jimmy Butler isn't. He's with Miami. And Tom Thibodeau is no longer there. Tom Thibodeau, you look at his record, 598 games, 352 wins, 246 losses, with a 589 winning percentage. Those are good numbers.
And even after Rose got hurt a lot of the times and Butler was really the only guy there and a lot of their players were younger, they were still a competitive team. They were a playoff team pretty consistently, even, again, losing Rose to all the injuries he had, which unfortunately derailed what would have been a very good career for him. And they still were winning amidst all that because of the defense. They were a 5 seed a lot of the time, or a 6 seed. They even hung tough, I think, Butler's last year when he was there before he was traded to Minnesota as an 8 seed. Remember that against the Celtics where they were, I think, up 2-0 or something like that. And every game was close in that series when the Celtics were a 1 seed. So they definitely have been a tough playoff out and a very good, well-run system because Thibodeau was there too. And I don't think that'll change with his coaching style. It's just, again, like you were saying, the GM thing really.
He's a drill sergeant, and this is what the New York Knicks have needed for years. I don't care what anybody says. I'm a New York Knicks fan, and I've sat back, watched the Knicks play terrible basketball. They have had one really good season in the last, I would say, 15 years. And that was with Carmelo Anthony, and I said this the other day. The 54-win season that the Knicks had when he was Offensive Player of the Year, and he won the scoring title for the New York Knicks, and he was runner-up for the MVP behind Kevin Durant. I think it was Kevin Durant.
LeBron. Durant was the next year.
Okay, so it was LeBron James. But I look at Tom Thibodeau as a guy that is a player's coach as much as a drill sergeant. Players thrive to him. Now, I know there's a lot of players that have come out and said that this was a bad move by the New York Knicks, bringing in a guy to try to develop some of the young talent that they have right now, like R.J. Derrick and Kevin Knox and Mitchell Robinson. Mitchell Robinson, if you've seen the video, he's shooting 3-point shots. So he is trying to develop his 3-point shot, and he's trying to get his 17-foot jumper. If he figures that out, Mitchell Robinson's going to be a dangerous player. You need to play defense. If you want to win championship in the NBA, it becomes a half-court game in the playoffs. If you do not play defense, you do not win. You could say whatever you want about your offensive style of game. The Golden State Warriors for years had a great offensive team. Did they win every year? They didn't. And you know why they didn't win every single year? Because they didn't play defense every single year.
And also, a lot of those years that they did win, too, people forget how much of a good defender Klay Thompson grew into, especially on the perimeter. And then Draymond Green, who was always a good defender for a long time when he was in the league. If those two players didn't grow as defenders like they did, they wouldn't have gone anywhere, too, because they could have lost shootouts to the other teams they played. Because, again, they weren't always the favorites in their first part of their existence. They really only became the favorites in 2015 when Steph was the MVP.
Why would anybody be upset that Tom Thibodeau took over the team? First of all, out of all the coaches that were available, Jason Kidd, Kenny Atkinson, all of them, Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson, the best high-profile coach out of all of them is Tom Thibodeau. You could say whatever you want. Go look. Besides Jeff Van Gundy, who out of all those guys has a better record and a better background as a head coach and as an assistant coach in the NBA? The answer is nobody. Nobody. Jeff Van Gundy hasn't coached in about 10 years with the Houston Rockets. So I would even take him out of the equation. I'm talking about Mark Jackson, Kenny Atkinson. Now, I'm not saying Kenny Atkinson isn't a great coach and he's not going to get another coaching job in the league. The problem with Kenny Atkinson, and I want to know the reason why the Nets decided to fire him after his second year. I don't care what anybody says. Kenny Atkinson's a sensational coach. You see the development. Jeremy Lin gives him a lot of credit for his development as a New York Knick. He was an assistant coach with the Knicks. Right. He is a guy that knows how to develop players. You see what the Nets have done over the years. But the problem right now with Kenny Atkinson is we don't know behind the reasons Sean Marks on why he fired him. This is a guy that got the Nets in his practically first year as a Nets coach. All these players, he didn't have any superstars on the team. He practically took that team to the playoffs with 42 wins.
Right. It was all second round and undrafted talent he had to work with the exception of Karis LeVert. That was the one first-round pick they had, and LeVert's always hurt, so it's not like you're dealing with a player that's a superstar player that's healthy all the time either. And even the years they didn't make the playoffs, they were always a tough out. They were always pesky, and like you were saying, they made the playoffs the last 2 years. So it's really impressive what he has done. And I think if NBA GMs are smart, which oftentimes they're not, but if they're smart, you would definitely see Atkinson in another coaching job in a heartbeat.
And here's another thing. Tom Thibodeau, if he didn't get this New York Knicks job, I think this would have been done with Tom Thibodeau making an attempt to get his dream job. He's been applying for this position for years. And just nobody, James Dolan or whoever was running the organization, Phil Jackson or anybody, didn't want him to be the coach. Why? I don't understand. You need a drill sergeant. You need a guy that's going to push the players. This guy is going to push the players to the limit. If you don't play defense, you don't play.
Right.
That's what you want. Mm-hmm. The New York Knicks the culture of the New York Knicks organization throughout the years was defense, defense, defense. Some of you guys never got to see the Knicks of the 90s. I did. The reason why the Knicks were so good is you had guys like Charles Oakley and Mark Jackson and Anthony Mason or Greg Anthony or Charlie Ward. All these players, they played defense. Patrick Ewing, even Charles Smith, who can't hit a layup, played defense. It's defense. Defense wins championships. Say whatever you want about professional sports. You want to talk about the quarterback position in football. You want to talk about the pitching position in baseball. You want to talk about basketball. You want to talk about offense and shooting threes. That's great. If you don't play defense, you don't win championships.
Just ask the Houston Rockets.
Ask the Houston Rockets. They have two guys that score about 30 points a game, and they can't get over the hump. This is the problem right now with the NBA. And that's what Tom Thibodeau preaches. You know why the Timberwolves weren't successful? They didn't play defense. They didn't play defense. And you can't blame the coach. The coach can only take them to that next edge. Right. And they didn't get over that edge. They didn't get over that hump. Right. And it didn't work for Karl Anthony Towns.
Especially in a sport, just a sport in general, where it's the hardest sport to play defense. It's the highest scoring, just numbers-wise, the highest scoring sport. So when you do play good defense, it really does matter that much more. Any other championship team, even if the offensive focal point is still the strength of their team, like we were saying with the quarterbacks, like with the Chiefs this year. It was more of an offensive team, but they still needed some level of defense in order to win. They needed to be above average, at least. And same thing like we were saying with the Warriors. If their defense wasn't above average, they would look like the Rockets too.
And that's why when I look at the big picture here with the New York Knicks, they picked the right guy. They picked the right guy. Now, we'll see what the right guy does when it comes to developing these players and the way they're going to build the team around R.J. Barrett. Because that's where we're going to see a championship competitive team or a team that's going to be completely outlandish and is never going to make the playoffs. And we're going to see Tom Thibodeau in for 2 years and fired like all the rest of the coaches. We expect Tom Thibodeau to get the best out of these players defensively and offensively. And hopefully guys like RJ Barrett will go up and down the court defensively to offensively and play his game. Jason Kidd was a highly profiled guy and a front runner for this position. I didn't understand it. Was it true? Was it not true? We'll never know. The fact is it's Tom Thibodeau. It's his team. And now we got to see what this team is going to be developed as. Are they going to bring in free agents? Are they going to bring in Giannis in a year? Are they going to maybe make a move for Anthony Davis when he becomes a free agent after this year, after the Lakers this
Bradley
season?
Beal, another option.
Bradley Beal is another one that they can make a trade. How about Karl Anthony Towns? Right. Mm-hmm. I know it didn't work over there with the Timberwolves. Maybe it'll work with Tom Thibodeau and the New York Knicks with R.J. Barrett. Who knows what Rose is planning? But the fact is right now, when you look at the big picture of where this New York Knicks team is, they're in a lot better place with Thibodeau than they were with Miller or Fizdale or any of the other coaches they've had over the last couple of years, and Jeff Hornacek and Derrick Fisher.
And a lot of those coaches, too, were just puppets for Phil Jackson, too. And you can't really have that for just being a puppet for a guy who's a presidential or president of basketball operations. It works for players. Obviously, we see it with LeBron. Tyronn Lue is a terrible coach, and he won a championship because of LeBron. Steve Kerr, we mock him all the time because he has loaded talent around him. He's not a great coach, but he won with a loaded talent around him. The Knicks don't have that right now because the Knicks are a rebuilding team. They're a young team, and we'll see what the young players develop into. They need that kind of coach, real coaching that'll help them grow as a team and make them competitive and make it attractive again for it to come to the Knicks. Now, again, there's still the James Dolan factor, but they need to make it in a different way attractive to come to the Knicks than just Madison Square Garden, just New York.
And that's why when you look at Tibbs and you look at everything that we've been talking about week in and week out, he was the right guy for the job. Anybody that doesn't think he was the right guy for the job, you can call the show and you can argue your points at 631-965-4990. I would love to hear what some of the fans think on the Tom Thibodeau acquisition. I think it was a good move by the New York Knicks. I think when you look at some of these players and you want to get the most out of Kevin Knox, who a lot of people thought was going to be a good player and really has fallen off the last year and a half. I want to see Tom Thibodeau get the best out of him. If he's not an offensive player, turn him into a shutdown defensive player. We know what Ntilikina could be as a defensive player, and he's transitioned into a pretty good offensive player as well. Dennis Smith Jr., another guy that's young and talented. Maybe he can bring him back and rediscover who he really is as an NBA player.
He's an interesting one because he was very similar as a prospect to what Derrick Rose was when he came out of Memphis. So that could be an interesting one to look at. Obviously Smith, obviously a little more raw than Rose was, but still a very similar type of player, a fast attacking point guard like Rose was.